What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Euphoria Season 3. Yes, Euphoria has concluded its third and final season on HBO. We expected this to be the final season for all the various meta reasons going into the season. The fact that this show stars three of the biggest movie stars of their respective generation in Zendaya, Sweeney, and Jacob Elordi kind of told us all we need to know about the odds of this show ever returning for a fourth season. But then as we watched Season 3 conclude, it became increasingly clear that yes, this season was also designed to be the final run for this show. And Euphoria, of course, has changed a lot between Seasons 1 and 2 and Season 3. And with the show having concluded, I do think this is one of the signature TV series of the last 10 years. It is an incredibly polarizing show. It always was, but I think Season 3 has invited a whole new cycle of reinterpretation and recontextualization as their wide reactions to this third season. But I think the Sam Levinson of it all, of course, Levinson himself has become a more reviled cultural figure in the lead up to Season 3 than he might have been when he first kind of bust out on the scene with the first season of the show. But the sheer audaciousness of what this show set out to do with its third and final season, I think, deserves to be applauded. Euphoria Season 3 was a massive reinvention of what this show previously had been, and I think that was an excellent decision, largely born out of necessity. A lot has changed for the key actors on this show, introducing a time skip and taking us out of the high school framing. I had a ton of time for watching Zendaya's Rue be part of a Quentin Tarantino-esque crime thriller. Did I ever expect to get something like that on Euphoria? No, but I'm so glad we did because I found it really compelling. One of the biggest questions with this third season, whatever form it was to take, how would Sam Levinson connect all these stories given the seemingly very challenging scheduling conflicts that persist when your show features Zendaya, Sweeney, and Jacob Elordi? And while the early goings of Season 3 definitely felt like you had a lot of plots separated, I do think for the most part they came together in a pretty solid way by the end. I think this was undoubtedly a very strong Cassie season with Sweeney completely leaning in, and a great season for Alexa Demi's Maddie as well, who I was really hoping would have a big presence on this season. The character that gets by far the shortest shrift has to be Hunter Schafer's Jules, who has really nothing at all to do on the season, and if she wasn't on the season at all, I don't think anyone's thoughts would really change. And that is a bit disappointing given how integral and essential the Jules character was to the early days of Euphoria. But simply put, the story had just moved away from that with Season 3. On its surface, Jacob Elordi's Nate has gone through quite the transformation, but I did find it satisfying to watch Nate become a pathetic loser after high school. It's just a far cry from the domineering villain he was in the early days. And hats off to Adwale Akinje Agbaji, who plays Alamo Brown on Season 3. He went for it the entire time and was a really welcome presence by the end. I thought he was a really great villain. The third season did a great job of honoring Eric Dane, very deftly incorporating him into the early parts of the season despite his struggles with ALS that would soon take his life after the filming was concluded. Angus Cloud's Fezco also has a nice presence on the show despite his physical departure both in real life and on the show. I've seen a lot of pearl clutching about the interests, quote unquote, of this season. Of course, strip clubs and sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, OnlyFans. A lot of male-leaning vices are essential part of the plot of this third season. That's obvious, but I'm not sure how you could watch this and see how it clearly portrays Alamo as a bad person and clearly portrays Maddie and Cassie's ownership and desire to get what's theirs and make a better life for themselves and reduce all that to the show is misogynist. Now, it does not mean the show is for everyone, particularly this third season. There's some tough stuff to watch for sure. That is fine. I just really appreciate how the season went for it in many respects. I mean, the 5th episode where we watch Cassie become like a Godzilla-esque kaiju pushing her way through skyscrapers. I thought that was great. Visually, production-wise, the show is outstanding. This division aside, there's just incredible blocking and color grading and things like that. And for a show shot in California, it did a great job of using those exteriors with the car sequences, Alamo's compound, etc. I found that finale really satisfying, and were some of the beats a bit predictable, particularly what happens with Ali, what happens with Bishop? Yes, But I think watching that play out still landed all the same. I think it's pretty clear that as more time passes, Euphoria will pretty clearly be viewed as the Gen Z version of Friends. That's largely in part due to all the star power in the show. And culturally, perhaps it's even closer to HBO's Girls in a certain respect, right? I guess the show that comes between Euphoria and Friends. It's got a bit of both, I guess you could say. But yeah, what a ride it's been. And I think with more time and more distance, the fact that Sweeney, Elordi, and Zendaya were all cooking on a show at the same time will feel like quite a bastion of a bygone era. Now, of course, that leads us to the finality that is this third season, right? Notably, Jacob Elordi's Nate Jacobs does die. And I think he dies in a incredibly captivating manner. I mean, early on, it's established that Nate is in over his head after taking over / inheriting his father's property business, and he is stonewalled due to environmental reviews and permitting delays and things of that nature. And as a result, he's way over his skis in terms of who he owes money to, and his business is smoke and mirrors at this point. And before long, that leads us into him in over his head and being actively pursued by one of his debtors, this loan shark, goon type who runs a coffin business, this Armenian fella. I forget the character's name. And watching Nate get tormented by that, I think it added a lot of strong tension to this season. I think the wedding episode was really nice, and I liked the way it concluded with Nate getting his face pummeled in when Cassie just sobs and thinks about herself in the moment, right? Amazing visual with that, with their incredibly tacky, gold interior house. The wedding scene itself, again, I think they got some great stuff of Eric Dane in that wedding. Notably, they sit him down. They have his character be drunk as a good way to kind of mask and work around his physical, ailments, as he was, of course, near the end of his life in real life. Quite notable with that wedding scene that I believe it was Zendaya and Sydney Sweeney never shared a frame together, likely never actually were on set at the same time. It's kind of obvious there in a funny way, but I like that stuff nonetheless. And of course, I understand people who are a bit squeamish, a bit off-put by watching Nate literally lose one of his toes and then also lose a finger, right? There's a grisly nature to this, but I like the pulpy crime thriller of all of this. Again, it's very Tarantino coded. It's very Pulp Fiction. It's an obvious homage to me, and it was satisfying. And yes, was Nate the quarterback of the football team and an athletic marvel in his more glory years of high school? Yes. Is it a bit confusing that he was never able to escape the enforcer guy who cuts off his limbs and beats him up? Perhaps. But he just was a different character because he was a different man. He had kind of been diminished with putting up a facade for so long. I liked it. I think it worked. And having him be buried alive and then accidentally killed by a rattlesnake that falls into his air hole was chef's kiss, honestly. I thought that was really quite the touch, and the physical reveal of what he looked like in death, obviously having died via the snake venom, was grisly. That was quite the turn. And of course, there was some other finality with the Rue character. We'll get to that. But alongside Nate, of course, you have the kind of never-ending web that was the Maddie Cassie stuff in this season. And I really liked the Cassie stuff, really from the beginning. Like, we knew it was going that way, right? Cassie was going to get on OnlyFans, and obviously there's so much meta stuff to that of Sydney Sweeney playing Cassie Jacobs, and previously Cassie Howard, now Cassie Jacobs, they get married, playing that character. And Sydney Sweeney is a very self-aware person. Like, she understands what people think of her and see about her, and she puts a lot of that into the Cassie character. And obviously the Cassie character is often played for laughs and sometimes not the most respected character in the frame on a lot of Euphoria, but I think that's kind of the point. And having Maddie come into the fold someone with an unfulfilling, assistant job post high school, but also someone who has a clear, knowledge of how the internet works and how the attention economy works and how women in particular are able to exploit that for their own gain. And then seeing Cassie for her obvious physical capabilities as a cash cow in that regard. I thought that was great stuff. And I think this show is saying a lot about where society is and the fact that, via an influencer's Instagram, she's able to just prop up her OnlyFans out of whole cloth. I thought that stuff was quite good, and there's a lot of modern stuff in this. I mean, at the very end, right, you have the Cassie and Maddie are going to use the old house, obviously with Nate gone, and become kind of like a incubator, like a hype house, a social media house, but just for girls, and probably leading into more OnlyFans type content. It's very referential to what happens in real life. I thought that was a pretty satisfying arc for those characters. I was really happy to get as much Maddie as we got, just because maybe it's because Alexa Demi has been largely uninvolved as a public figure in between seasons. She just recently did a large interview with the Hollywood Reporter kind of talking about those things. She's not actually retiring. That is fake news. But we got a ton of Maddie this season, and watching Maddie get brought into the Alamo orbit, right? Of course, bringing that plot into the Rue plot that had largely been off on its own for most of the season. And Maddie having an attraction to that and seeing the potential in the strip club business, but also quickly realizing the darkness and the crossing of the lines legally and morally that's right there as well. I think that stuff worked. I mean, would I like another detente episode where they talk about those things and really get into it? Sure. The only real detente kind of stuff you get is between Cassie and her sister, Lexi, of course, played by Maud Apatow. And Maud Apatow really this season only gets to exist as the moral superior figure, kind of a tough hang in certain elements. A lot of her scenes with Rue are challenging, I guess you could say. And not that Rue isn't a challenging character to be with as well, but at least you get this kind of extended back and forth between Cassie and Lexi in the finale that I think expressed a lot of feelings and thoughts and takeaways that the show has as well in a solid way. As I mentioned, I didn't think the Jules character had much to offer this season, unfortunately. Jules away, out of town, being a sugar baby, doing her thing, having the personal agency. And I think there's some good conversations between Rue and Jules about that status, that choice, actively pursuing that. What's so bad about it is something else out there so better and so much of a clearer, better decision, a la should Rue and Jules get back together? Is that really a better decision? I think there's some sophisticated conversation between them. It just kind of feels completely off to the side because apart from when Jules goes to the wedding and is part of those ensemble scenes, and then the other time where Lexi brings her in to do an hilarious painting for the show she works on, the daytime soap with Sharon Stone, and Jules does this completely nude-filled painting with lots of penises and stuff. Apart from those two moments, Jules is really off on her own, not with the rest of the cast. I feel like the show and Levinson felt compelled to keep Jules here because Jules was such an important character in the early days of Euphoria. Jules being a trans character was also very important to the storytelling and what the show did in the early days. Of course, Rue being gay, Jules being trans, them coming into a relationship and that early dynamic, following the connection to Nate's dad and Jules. I mean, a lot of that was kind of the core text of early Euphoria, and that's just not here in season 3. Season 3 reinvented itself in many ways, and the Jules character and what that character represented ultimately was a casualty for good and for bad. And of course, that leads us to the Rue character, played by Zendaya. Zendaya's performance as Rue has always been really cool to me because it's, especially in the early days, obviously she's done a lot more engaging film work of late. Shout out the drama this year. But when Euphoria first came out, it was the first time where Zendaya was really being an adult performer and doing some wild transgressive stuff, right? you think about at that time, she had largely just kind of been a supporting actor, post the Disney stuff, right? She was on Spider-Man, supporting role. Greatest Showman, supporting role. Then we get to Dune, supporting role, right? But with Euphoria, it was the Zendaya show through and through. And Rue Bennett was such a, wild child, right? Because she was completely fucked up most of the time as playing an addict. And in the season, for the large stretch of it, she's playing Rue as a clean person. But she's still a impulsive character, a character that struggles in certain situations and lends itself to lots of physical comedy, and Zendaya doing a lot of acting with her face and things like that. I think it was a great turn and fun to watch, even for most of the time Zendaya is off doing her own thing on the show and not really connecting with most of the other characters. I mean, she has a handful of scenes, with Lexi or Maddie or Cassie. That's really about it. She doesn't really interact with anyone else at the wedding. And of course the separate Jules scenes, as I mentioned. But what you get is Rue getting into the mix with this new other side of the drug world that she previously had gotten sucked into via Laurie and Fezco and having this big debt to Laurie. We knew the Laurie side of things. But then seeing her rival, Alamo Brown, and his side of things, the strip club magnate who also runs drugs and does other things as well. Very unsavory character despite his charms. And it was great to watch Rue kind of go in there and stop being a drug mule for Laurie and making those Mexico runs. That I think that stuff was very compelling in the first episode, watching her down the balloons, put her car and get it stuck on the border wall, literally. Taking that to the Alamo side of things, where you have the very enigmatic Bishop and Marshawn Lynch killing it in a really amusing way. I love that stuff. I thought it was great. As a result, you get more of Laurie's crew. Toby Wallace joining the fold, playing a really fun character in Wayne, who's really just a redneck, racist Nazi type, but has a love for Faye, who we've come to know a little bit as well. Early on, I had wanted more Toby Wallace. I'm like, I feel like we're not getting enough of him, because he's a real firecracker as well in the movie roles I've seen him in. But he gets his side of things at the end there, which was nice. I think if there's anything that doesn't really work or fully land for me with Rue, it was her finding God, which is introduced early on, gets kind of ignored for most of the season, and then comes up big at the end there. I think it was just kind of inconsistent thematically, tonally, the religious side of things. That being said, watching Alamo catch on to Rue's role with the DEA, right? Rue getting pinched, forced into becoming a informant for them, and in process setting them all up, and she'll buy herself some freedom or abbreviated sentence, whatever it might be. And Alamo catching on to that via Maddie, via Lexi, who Rue had talked to. And then you see it coming. You see it coming well before it finally happens, where Alamo gives Rue some fentanyl-laced, or just straight up fentanyl, in place of Percocets, because Rue gets injured following her scheme to set up. And I think that scheme to set up Laurie's crew, where she has to sneak out and gets lassoed and dragged on horseback, and then Marshawn Lynch snipes Bro, and she's able to escape. I mean, visually, it's impeccable stuff, but it sets you up for her being perhaps willing in that moment to take some prescription drugs that she used to abuse, of course. And in the end, Alamo sets her up to OD, and she ODs on Ali's couch. And you see it coming. I think they manifest in a really nice way, where you think Rue is actually woken up, and she sees on the TV that Fez has escaped prison via using parkour technique. She's going to go pick up Fez. You're watching that. You're watching this manic driving from Zendaya. Rue's, running red lights and running past the police barricades. And you're like, this is how it's going to be. She's just going to completely crack and be super impulsive. And I was like, oh, this is tough. Have it not be this way. And it's not that way. You find out, no, it's actually a dream. She was running back to quickly go see her mom one last time. And in the end, she actually ODs on Ali's couch. And Rue's dead, just like Nate's dead. And I wasn't going into the season expecting them to necessarily kill Rue, but it's not shocking. Meta-wise, I mean, we know that these big actors did not want to return to the show, obviously. But I appreciated the clarity to it, the conclusion to it. And it also lent itself to, I think, a really welcome and satisfying conclusion where Ali comes back into the fold in a major way. Coleman Domingo was really only in the beginning of the season, and that was it. He himself has never been more in demand as an actor, I understand. But then he gets to come back in a big way, completely rejecting everything he's done as a sponsor and giving up after losing one person too many with Rue's death. And instead he goes and seeks revenge and strolls up with a sawed-off and shoots Alamo, kills him, providing a complete conclusion to that thread in the process, right? Maddie, whatever amount of faith she might have had is gone in that scene. She's completely disillusioned by that when she watches Alamo grab her as a human shield temporarily. She was having reservations in the lead up to that, but was still kind of dealing with Alamo given what she had done to help free Cassie earlier on. And then watching Bishop set up Alamo by giving him an unloaded gun to defend himself with. Satisfying. Did I expect all that to happen? Yes. Had they set up Bishop the entire time to have something about him? Daryl Britt Gibson from The Wire playing Bishop as this steely, quiet, monotone, even keel guy. Direct contrast to Marshawn Lynch's more gregarious, charismatic, enjoying the strippers type character. Bishop's been cool, calm, but a man of principle. And Alamo went too far eventually, and Ali killed him. Man, I found a lot of that stuff really cool. You just have to get over that this was not your old Euphoria, and not all the threads perfectly lean together, but what else on TV is like this show? Whether beforehand or now. Beforehand, I think the early comparison was like Skins, the UK series. Shout out Nicholas Hoult. A lot of parallels there, right? Hedonistic kids, fucking doing drugs, blowing off school. Ingratiates itself to a lot of people for that regard. But this season, I mean, the budget's so clear, the star power's so evident, the pulpiness is right there, right? Who's making Tarantino thrillers on TV right now? No one. No one's really funding them. They're expensive to make. I thought this show was really cool for this season was really cool for a lot of reasons. And yeah, I think there's moral judgments to make. It doesn't mean you have to like Sam Levinson or what he represents necessarily. But man, does that guy go for it. He shot a shot. And I think most of those shots he took this season, they swished. I thought it was a complete blast. It was a show that knew what it was the entire time with this third season. And I'm really grateful that it panned out the way it did, And obviously it goes without saying, but very much looking forward to the future careers of all these stars, most of which are already doing a lot. Very hopeful that Alexa Demi will start to work a little bit more because I also think she's really great. But let me know, what did you think of Euphoria Season 3? What did you think of all these changes with this third season? Did you think it worked and concluded in a satisfying way? Let me know whatever you're thinking. And for more TV reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.